So, welcome again. Welcome to this talk on nutrition and menopause. We're going to kick off by looking at fat loss. It's a subject that can get very emotive for people as they go through menopause. And I thought I'll put it at the beginning so we get it out of the way, because otherwise that's the one that everybody wants to know about. So not everybody, but it is common for us to gain weight through menopause, and it's particularly common through menopause for us to gain weight around our midsection. Now, I think that we don't really know exactly why this is. One of the issues with being a woman is that the research done on women is far less than the research done on men. There's a real lack of research into women. There's a lack of evidence to back up a lot of the claims that we hear being made in the menopause space. When I first started doing talks on menopause, maybe 3-4 years ago, not many people were talking about menopause at all, and that has changed massively, and that is brilliant because it's less of a stigma around it. There's more information out there, but there's also a lot of stuff being said to us which isn't evidence-based. And so everything I'm saying today, there's evidence behind it, but I would say there is not conclusive answers on anything really, because it's still such a new subject. It's not new, women have had this forever, but it's something that's only recently really been investigated and proper research going into. But in terms of why we think we gain fat in menopause, number one, we, through menopause, for lots of different reasons, but we often end up more fatigued. We end up with mood swings, particularly as our hormones are changing. And as we all know, whatever stage of life we're in, when we're feeling tired, when we're feeling upset, when we're feeling moody, whatever, we often turn to food. So sometimes it's purely that we are eating more food, and often pure nutritional choices, the chocolate, the biscuits, because they make us feel better. I talked a lot more about that in the Q&A earlier in the week, so you can sort of hear my responses to how we can deal with that if you go back to that recording. Another reason is that we often through menopause experience injuries or other barriers to training. Again, that lack of energy. It could be we've got sore boobs. It could be that we find that our body just doesn't move so well. Millions of things which I talked about in the session yesterday on training, but there's lots of reasons why we find it harder to move, to do our training. And if we're moving less, we're burning less calories. So that can be an impact as well. We hear a lot about through menopause how we have a decreased sensitivity to insulin. So insulin's what helps to regulate and bring down our blood sugar, and we become less sensitive. So we end up with sort of spikes and not uncontrolled, but much more blood sugar circulating in our body. That can definitely lead us to put on weight. We talked about yesterday in the training seminar how to address that through training. So building up our muscles so that we've got more of a store for the blood glycogen, but also some high intensity intervals we could look at doing. Today, I'll talk about how we can address it from a dietary perspective. Another thing that increases through menopause is stress, both stress, we feel stressed because of all the things that are going on, but also actual hormones, stress hormones in our body. So we hear a lot about cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone, which is completely natural. It's part of our everyday process, but it can be elevated during menopause, and that can lead our body to kind of think, oh God, things are going wrong. I need to protect myself. I need to make sure I've got fat to deal with this crisis. You know, I've got energy to deal with this crisis. So we store fat, and particularly around our belly. I'll talk a bit more about addressing that tomorrow in the rest and recovery session. We might be following harmful diet strategies. So particularly fasting can, whilst we think that it might reduce calories and therefore help us lose weight, often the fasting or the not fueling ourselves enough can be one of the things that contributes to fat storage. And I'll be talking about that in 1 second. I already talked about the decrease in muscle mass and that its relevance in terms of meaning that we haven't got somewhere to store the glycogen, and also reducing our metabolic rate as we lose muscle mass. The changes in hormones we have can often produce an inflammatory response in our body, and that both causing and separately too, we often also through the changes in estrogen have a less diverse microbiome. So both of those things can interplay together, but they also in themselves can both potentially lead to weight gain, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that today. And then there's also theories that actually it's a protective mechanism. We often see that it's actually the thinner women who tend to put on more weight, and particularly that belly weight, or belly fat, not literally put on more weight, but as a percentage of their existing body weight. And maybe that's because the body knows that it does need some more fat storage to help it through the stressful time. Often that fat can actually be productive in terms of generating more estrogen, a different form of estrogen, but it can be the body's response to try and make sure it's still producing estrogen. So maybe the body is deliberately doing it to protect us. As I say, there's lots of theories. I don't think we know definitively, and I'm sure it's not just one thing, it's probably a combination. So to go into some of those in more detail, in terms of, so I said that through menopause, we become more resistant to insulin. So insulin being the hormone that's released to help us to control our blood sugar. And as we become more resistant to it, we have to produce more for it to do its job, and it doesn't do its job so effectively. Now, the worst thing that we can do to kind of fuel that cycle is to eat processed carbs or high energy carbohydrates, sugary carbohydrates, refined as I already said, that refined carbohydrates, so you like your white pasta, your white bread. So it's not just sugar and chocolate that is the sort of that can be a problem here. It's all those refined carbs as well. Like I say, the white pasta, the white bread, the white rice, those sort of things. When we eat those refined carbohydrates, we get this rush of blood glucose coming into our body, and we get an energy high. Often, as I said on the previous slide, when we're feeling low in energy, we turn to those sugary snacks because we know that they give us the energy fix. The problem is we get the energy high, but then the insulin's released to try and bring down the blood sugar, and we get this big crash. So we get the energy high, but then we get the crash afterwards. That can lead us to feel, low in mood, low in energy. Often that then leads us to crave more sugar. So we end up having more sugar, the insulin's released, and we go into this complete cycle. And so we're having these highs and lows, which do not make us feel good. The other problem, though, is that because we've got this excess blood sugar, we've got the excess sugar circulating in our blood, our body needs to store it. It needs to store it somewhere. And so it stores it often as fat, but often as belly fat. And in the long term, if we carry on that path to increased insulin resistance, that's where we start to see more long-term health risks coming in. As we get higher insulin resistance, higher inflammation levels, we start to have metabolic diseases. So ultimately, that can be leading to things like type 2 diabetes and coronary heart disease. So we want to try and avoid those high energy snacks or meals. So instead, we want to be moving more towards whole food carbs and carbohydrates mixed with proteins and healthy fats. If we have whole food carbs, which have got more fiber in them, or if they're mixed with protein and healthy fats, it takes slower to digest. So rather than us getting this whole rush of sugar coming into the bloodstream and everything goes haywire, it has to digest a lot more slowly. And so it comes into the bloodstream more slowly. We can deal with it and we don't get the highs and the lows. So we want to focus on whenever I'm working with clients who are trying to lose weight and they see it as something very restrictive and they say, I'm not allowed this, I'm not allowed this, I'm not allowed this. And that feels very negative. And then all you can think about is, I want this, I want this, I want this. If we try and move the focus on to nourishing rather than restricting. So rather than thinking, I can't have this, think about what we can have. Think about focusing on those whole food carbs, the protein, the healthy fats, the things that are going to enrich our diet. These are going to have, as I say, a slower release, so we're not getting the highs and lows, which gives us a more sustained energy flow. But they're also more satiating, so we feel full for longer. When we have those carbs, we feel full for a bit, but then it quickly passes and we feel hungry again. Oh, car backfiring outside. Whereas when we have the fats, the protein, the fiber, it's more satiating. We feel full for longer and it's nourishing our body. It's giving us more nutrients that help us feel healthier, feel better. It's also less inflammatory. If we have lots of processed sugar, if we have lots of high fat things, they can be very inflammatory, which leads to a whole load of health consequences in our diet. And as I said, during perimenopause, we often have higher inflammation levels anyway. So we don't want to be doing more to fuel that. And then, as I spoke about yesterday, we can also look at building our muscle and we can look at those higher intensity intervals, and those can both help to overcome that insulin resistance as well. So I hope that's it's not loads of detail, but I hope that's enough to kind of put the picture in terms of how we can look at reducing fat. The next thing that I really, really want to talk about is fueling your training. Often, and because, especially when women are getting so worried about putting on weight, they start trying to cut back and they're not fueling their life, but they're particularly not fueling their training. So if you are an active woman who trains, whatever it is, swim, bike, run, weights, gym classes, whatever it is, please make sure that you are fueling your training with carbohydrates. There's this whole demonization of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates aren't bad. Refined carbs are not that good for us. In some contexts they can be, but in a general diet they're not great for us. But carbohydrates, the wider sense, the whole food carbohydrates, they are not bad for us. If we underfuel our training, we risk that weight gain, as I just said, because our body thinks there's not enough coming in. Instead of burning what we've got, it goes, oh my God, there's not enough coming in, and you want me to go to the gym and do, whatever it is you're asking me to do. I'm going to save what I've got. So it tries to hold on to what it's got rather than burning what we've got. So it can actually be counterproductive in terms of the weight gain. Plus the fact that if you go out and you do, a long bike ride or something and you haven't fueled enough while you're out, you come home and you're starving and you walk in and you're like, I need this, and this, and you eat a whole load more. So you potentially, if you were trying to do it to lose weight, you potentially are gaining weight then again, because you end up eating more in the long run to try and refuel yourself. But almost more importantly, you're leaving yourself vulnerable to injury. If you're not fueling your training sufficiently, then your body is going to have to break down muscle, because that's where it's going to get its energy from if it doesn't have enough circulating carbohydrate. You might end up with reduced bone density because you haven't got enough energy to fuel your training, and then you end up, with potentially stress fractures and things like that. And ultimately, because you're not fueling your training, you can't achieve so much in that training session, so you'll make less progress in your training. Contrarily, if that's a word, when you fuel yourself well, that's giving you the energy you need for the session. So you can train harder, you can achieve more in the session. People think when I say fuel more that I'm going to be creating a calorie surplus compared with the other version of what you're going to do. It's not that at all. You can actually burn more calories now because you're taking on more, you can train harder. I hate linking exercise to burning calories. I think that's such a negative path to go down, and it makes us not enjoy our training because we're just thinking about it as burning calories. So I say try and get away from that way of thinking. But if you are thinking about it in terms of burning calories, consume more, you can train harder, you can burn more. But that also means as you train harder, you get more adaptation, so you build your fitness more, you're fueling your recovery, so you recover better, so you're less likely to get injured, so you can carry on training well into the future. And ultimately, you'll just feel better and enjoy it more. In terms of what we should be fueling, like how much or when we should be fueling, so we have enough energy stored in our body for about 60 to 90 minutes worth of exercise. If you're doing less than 60 to 90 minutes worth of exercise, you might not need to fuel. But if you've been fasting, and for that I would include overnight, because we fast, we're not eating overnight. So if we haven't been fueling recently in the last few hours, if our session's over 60 minutes, or if it's a high intensity session, so we're going to be burning through the energy faster, then I would really encourage you to try fueling it. If it's less than that, if it's less than the 60 to 90 minutes, or it's not particularly high intensity, you might still want to look into fueling it, particularly if you're feeling tired, and especially if you're always feeling tired. If your training just isn't progressing, if you keep on doing the training but you're not seeing the benefits of the training that you would expect, or if you keep getting injured, or if you're just finding it really hard work, try fueling, see if it works for you. You'll often find that you get more out of the session. So ask yourself now, do you underfuel your training? Do you make sure that you are giving your body what it needs to do the training that you're doing? And if not, do you know why? Most commonly I'll hear, particularly when I'm working with women, is that we're worried about putting on weight. Again, if we're fueling the right stuff, then it means we burn more in the session because we can get more out of the session. And it's not necessarily about eating more, it's just about thinking when you eat. So if you were training in the evening, sort of after work or something, you can just make sure that you have a sort of carb-based snack coming out maybe out of your evening meal at 3 o'clock before you train at 5 o'clock. I don't know whoever finishes work by 5, but you know what I mean. And then you just have a lighter dinner afterwards. So it's just making sure you go into the session with your glycogen stores topped up. In terms of what you're eating, as I say, it could be the meal before, just making sure you've had some carbohydrates, some good carbohydrates in the meals before. It could be any of those things there, dried fruit, granola or something, bananas, something with a good amount of carbohydrate in it. The other reason that people often say to me that they don't fuel their sessions is because they're training first thing and they struggle to eat first thing. Try and find something that could work for you. It might be a smoothie. It might be, I'm a big fan of rice pudding. I seem to be living off rice pudding at the moment, but could be rice pudding, something that's just gentle on your stomach, easy to digest, that you can have and, that will sit well with you before you train, a banana or something. So try experimenting with different things. So yeah, ask yourself, if you are underfueling, do you know why? And are you prepared to do something about it? Are you prepared to at least give it a go and try fueling and see how it feels, see if things feel better, if they feel different? That's about before our training. Then we want to make sure that we're fueling our recovery. So when we train, we break down our body, we sustain micro injuries wherever it is that we're working, and our body rebuilds itself stronger. That's how we get fitter. So, but we need to make sure we're giving it the building blocks. The building blocks are sleep, and we'll be talking about that tomorrow, but also through our diet, mainly protein. So in terms of fueling your recovery, the recommendations for an active woman is that you should be aiming for at least 1 gram at the very, very, very minimum, up to 2 grams. Some people might say 2.5, but that's when you're doing pretty heavy training. But 1 to 2 grams for every kilo of body weight per day. So see what your weight is in kilograms, and you want that in grams. At least that in grams if you're going for that 1 gram per kilo of body weight, but up to two grams per kilo of body weight. We want to do that because it's helping us to preserve our muscle and our bone. When we're in perimenopause through to menopause, we're much more anabolic, meaning that our body is trying to break itself down rather than build itself up. So we want to try and therefore we're at risk of losing our muscle. If we haven't got enough fuel coming in, we're at risk of losing our muscle. If we're not doing strength training, we're at risk of losing our muscle. If we're not eating enough protein, we're at risk of losing our muscle. Muscle is essential, not just because we want to look ripped or whatever, but because it's what keeps our body stable. It's what will help us move well into old age, move healthily, be able to get ourselves up off the chair, support our joints. You know, it's so important, not just for our training, but for our health and longevity. So we need the protein to help us preserve our bone and muscle, and to help us avoid injury. We need to recover from our training and make sure that we're not getting injured in the process. In terms of recommended amounts, we want to be having at least 30 grams of protein in each meal. And depending on how much you weigh and therefore what that target is, you'll probably also look at supplementing with protein-based snacks. We also want to make sure that we're fueling after our training session. So if we've done a strength session or a cardio session, we probably want about 30 to 40 grams of protein within about 30 to 40 minutes post-training. The including 3 in brackets there is that we ideally want 3 to 4 grams of leucine as well. Leucine's a type of amino acid, a type of protein. If you have whey protein, which is one of the most common proteins you'll find in a recovery shake or something, you'll find that that's got that 3 grams of leucine in there. If you're vegan, pea protein, you might need a little bit more than 30 to 40 to get to those 3 grams of leucine, but pea protein is a good source of leucine as well. If you're already doing all of that, then another thing to look at is adding in 15 grams of protein pre-training. If you're doing particularly a more significant session, either weights or cardio, but a heavier session, look at priming your body with that 15 grams of protein before you train. But if you're nowhere near these targets already, then I'd say that's next level step. Just get your protein, your daily protein sorted first of all. So another question for you to ask yourself: do you get enough protein? What's your weight in kilos? And do you get at least I'd say 1.5 grams of protein per kilo of body weight? If it's not something you've ever thought about, then chances are, unless you are very, very into eating lots and lots of meat, chances are you are not getting it. It's something you need to make a focused effort on. Once you've done it, then it's easy to stick with it. But if you haven't thought about it before, then chances are you probably aren't. I've worked with very, very few women who are meeting their protein targets. In terms of meeting those protein targets, I also would say pretty much every person I've ever worked with has said, yep, I'll do that. And they put it over there. And every time we talk about it, they're like, yeah, I'll do that tomorrow. It's something we put off because it sounds like a big thing to do. It's not. So tomorrow, I want you to, when you have your breakfast, and most of us have a similar thing for breakfast each day, when you get your breakfast, look at what it is. If it comes in a packet, look at the nutritional information on the back, weigh the portion that you have, a traditional portion of whatever it is that you have, and look at the nutritional information and work out with the thing that you're eating how much protein is in there. If you've got, for example, protein and nuts and whatever else, then you need to do a few different calculations there. I am not saying you should weigh your food every day. Absolutely, absolutely not. Don't advocate that at all. But while you're just working out these numbers, weigh the most common meals you have. So start with your breakfast. Then you probably have a few different options of what you typically eat for lunch. Again, you need to weigh them to find out what your portion size is. Look at the nutritional information. If it's not something that comes out of a packet, just have a quick Google. You'll find a rough number. It doesn't need to be precise. Don't worry if you have a salad. Don't worry about every single vegetable and everything. You're just looking for the things that have protein in, that are the sort of sources of protein, and calculating those. And then you'll know, are you roughly hitting that 20 to 30 grams per meal, or are you way off? If you're way off, what could you do to add more protein into the meal? If you're hitting that 20 to 30 grams per per meal that you're having, then how much more do you need to supplement? And is that about shakes? Is that about snacks? Some people don't like to do shakes at all. That's fine. They're quick, they're easy, they're convenient. But if you don't like them, you don't have to do them at all. Finding some snacks that work for you so you can get up to that number. So I've just taken the typical example of somebody who's 75 kilos here and who's aiming for 1.5 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. They need to hit 110 grams of protein throughout the day. They might get 20 grams at breakfast, 30 at lunch, 30 at dinner. Then they're going to have a 20 gram protein shake, and they're going to have some snacks throughout the day. There you go. They've got that 110. But that takes some focus, particularly if you don't eat meat. And I'd say probably the majority of my clients don't eat meat. It's harder, but it's doable. But you need to put some focus into it. Again, if you've got questions on that, you can pop them into the chat or ask them at the end. When I asked people signing up for this week what the most common what the most sort of significant symptoms of menopause that they experience are, the biggest one by far was fatigue. So what can we do through our diet to reduce fatigue? And this is kind of repeating something I've already said, but coming at it from a different angle. So we want to make sure that we're swapping those refined carbs for whole grains, fruit, and veg. So I've already said it in terms of insulin, but there's more reasons to do it. So swapping those refined carbs for whole grains and fruit and veg can actually help to counterbalance some of the negative impacts of menopause. So as we've already said, it can help us to manage our blood sugar. The whole grains, fruit and veg are actually anti-inflammatory. Menopause can be an inflammatory process. Inflammation in our body is not good for us. All of those, the whole grains, fruit and veg can be anti-inflammatory. So brilliant. That's helping to bring things back down again. They can help the diversity of the gut bacteria in our microbiome. I can talk for hours about the microbiome. I'm not going to today. But the microbiome is our gut, where all the gut bacteria lives. That sounds horrible, but gut bacteria is very good for us, and we want a big diversity of different bacteria living in there. And so we want to feed that bacteria, and that bacteria, it loves variety. It loves as many different whole grains, fruit and veg as it can have. The healthier our microbiome is, the healthier we are. Our immunity, a massive proportion, I think 70% of our immunity is kind of housed in our microbiome. I've said that wrong, but I think you get the point that I mean. It's massively important for our mood. If we have a healthy microbiome, it can help our mental health, and it can help reduce that inflammation and the potential. There's a big link between our microbiome and weight gain. So, putting on weight. So a healthy microbiome, happy, healthy us. And as we know, fruit and veg is what's really great for giving us vitamins and minerals, which we need for that optimal functioning. A lot of processes within menopause mean that we're more vulnerable to reduced vitamins and minerals in our system. So we want to make sure that we're countering that by getting that variety of whole grains, fruit and veg. Something to aim for, not something to really, whip ourselves about if we can't do it, but a thing to aim for is 30 different whole foods in a week, and we talk about across the Super Six. So the Super Six being fruit, vegetable, whole grains, beans and pulses, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices. So looking across that whole range of different whole foods, trying to get 30 different whole foods into our diet each week. And it sounds quite easy when you start, but then you realize you eat the same things each day, and so it becomes harder. But then that encourages you to think, oh, I had broccoli yesterday, I'll have some other vegetable today. So it's just trying to get that diversity in there. This is a quote from somebody who did a course that I run at the beginning of the year, Feel Fit Foundations, where we talk a lot more about diet in there. And she didn't have a good diet. She had IBS, and so she'd got really nervous about what she ate. She'd really restricted what she ate. And through doing the course, she started trying that 30 different whole food challenge. And this is what she said. She said, within a month, I noticed a huge difference. I can't believe how much it's changed my mental and physical well-being. I haven't been ill since I started doing it, and I can't recommend it enough. So that was just one person who found a massive change in her, physical and mental well-being through introducing that variety of whole foods into her diet. In terms of other drains on our energy, chronic inflammation, which I've talked about a lot. Chronic inflammation comes from a whole load of different things, but some of the biggest causes are stress, which I'll talk about tomorrow, and that high sugar, high fat diet. So the more we can cut out those things, the less we have that inflammation, cutting down long-term health problems, but also helping to reduce that drain on energy in the now. Eating too close to sleep. So parasympathetic we call it parasympathetic overload, but the idea is you've heard of rest and digest, you've heard of fight and flight, and then you've heard of rest and digest. And we want to go into rest and digest when we go to bed. If we're trying to rest, we don't want our body to be trying to digest at the same time. That's where we get that overload. So let our body do its resting by making sure we're not trying to digest at the same time. So eating 2 to 3 hours before bed can make a massive difference to your energy levels and ultimately to health levels. If we have too many carbs, our body can be too busy trying to process all that, particularly as I've said, the more refined carbs. But also if we have too little, we need carbohydrates for everything, but for sleep as well. So we need to get that good balance of whole foods, not too much, not too little. Lack of movement, yes, obviously movement burns calories, which is burning energy, but lack of movement is one of the biggest causes of us feeling sluggish. So if you're feeling, that real sluggish, try just doing some movement. It doesn't have to be hard movement, just a walk or something can make a massive difference. And our brain is 75 to 80% water. So drinking water can literally help us feel more energized because we're helping our brain. Trying to avoid alcohol. We think alcohol helps us sleep. It doesn't. It's a sedative. It means that we're not getting such good quality sleep, and also making sure we're not overdoing it on the caffeine. We can get to that point of feeling so tired because we're not sleeping well, and then we end up just completely wired on caffeine, which is not helping us in so many different ways. It's not helping us sleep. It's not helping us stress. So trying to actually bring down that caffeine. Quickly, just to cover supplements, because supplements is such a massive area in the menopausal world. As I said, a few years ago, nobody talked about menopause. Now you can't move for people trying to sell you solutions to menopause. I would say, whatever the supplement or whatever it is, exercise caution and judgment. People often go, but it's natural. And I go, well, so is cocaine, so is nicotine. They're not good for you, though. So just because it's natural, it doesn't mean it's not harmful. If you think it has the power to do some good, it also has the power to do some harm. Examine.com is a good sort of database to look at for evidence on different supplements. And where possible, I would always go for a food first approach. So getting the nutrition in through your diet, your body absorbs it better rather than taking supplements. Often we take a supplement, it goes straight through, we pee it out, we spent a lot of money. Have we achieved anything? Sometimes we have, but always try the food first. That should be your primary source of nutrients. But some key things to consider where I might consider supplementing: iron. Menopause can be, it's not that it reduces the iron, but it can inhibit the iron absorption, the changes in our body through menopause. So if you are feeling fatigued, it's always worth getting those iron levels checked and making sure that you are getting enough iron. Particularly as we go through menopause, we can have the kind of crime scene period, so lots and lots of bleeding, which means we're losing blood, obviously, which can mean we're losing iron. If we're runners, and if we're exercising, so we can potentially be losing more iron. The actual impact of our foot hitting the ground can, I'm going to say, disrupt the iron in our body. That's not the technical term, but so there's lots of reasons that we might be more at risk. So definitely get your iron levels checked if you are feeling fatigued. Magnesium is kind of seen as a wonder supplement, and I think sometimes oversold, but it can be useful if you're having trouble sleeping. For me, it made a massive difference in heart palpitations that I was experiencing. So there are sometimes it's worth taking. You can speak to your doctor, although my doctor tested me for it. My understanding is you can't really test for it because it's in the cells, not in the blood. If anybody knows better than me, I'd love to know the answer on that. But speak to your doctor if you're concerned, but it can help for some things. We also lose magnesium when we're stressed and in our sweat. So again, if we're stressed active women, we might be losing that magnesium. Vitamin D3 from October through to March. If you live in the UK, you're almost very likely to be deficient in vitamin D3. We need sunlight we need sunlight hitting our skin to manufacture it. So, and because of the angle that the sun comes through in this country, even if you're outdoors all day, you're not likely to have stores of vitamin D3. So I'd say at least in those winter months, I would be supplementing unless there's a medical reason that you shouldn't be. And then probably the one that's receiving more and more attention, creatine monohydrate, is a supplement that is well known in the bodybuilding world. It's also increasingly been researched in terms of helping us with our cardio training, but particularly it's been looked at in terms of its relationship to the brain. It's been shown to really help with concussion, but it's also having really good results with menopausal women experiencing brain fog. So taking creatine can help with brain fog. Try it for yourself, see if it makes a difference. You don't need to do the whole loading protocol. You can just be taking a maintenance dose of it. So in summary, Avoid refined carbs and instead choose a big diversity of whole foods and whole grains. Eat enough protein, 1 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Fuel your training with carbs followed by protein afterwards, or potentially a little bit of protein before. And as much as possible, avoid adding stress, both in a dietary form and in anything else. Before I forget, so I'm running a competition all this week. There's a clue, a code word in each of the sessions I'm doing this week. You need to email me with all of the code words and you'll go into a draw to win a whole load of prizes. There's more details about the prizes and the draw on my website. Today's clue, so it's triathlon themed. We've done swim, we've done bike, we're on to run. Today's clue is trainers. So write down trainers. That is your third clue to go into that prize draw. And then you need to just email me the answer to at least 3 of the 4 code words. So that's me done, almost done for talking. If you've got any questions, please either pop them into the chat or you can unmute and ask me. While you think of any questions, I'm just going to go on and quickly tell you about where you can find out more. So there's one more talk in the Menopause Week coming up tomorrow. We're looking at mindset, rest and recovery, probably the one that everybody goes, oh, that's not so interesting, I won't bother with. I'd say it's probably the most essential. If you get the emails from me, you'll be getting a link to all of the sessions, so don't worry if you can't join live. Also, to let you know, I'm running a special offer for people who have attended Menopause Week. So if you are interested or potentially interested in working with me on a training plan, then I'm offering 50% off a light touch off-season plan. So that's running for up to 4 months, valid from November to February. On that light touch plan, you get a monthly coaching call where we talk about whatever we need to talk about. We can talk about nutrition. We can talk about anything to do with menopause. We can talk about, races you've got coming up and skills or whatever you need to work on for that. Talk about motivation, talk about blocks you're having with your training, anything that is relevant to you, your health, your happiness, and your training. And then we discuss what your training plan will look like as well. I write you a training plan, which is online on an app called Training Peaks, uploaded for you to do for the month. And then we meet the next month, we talk about the previous month, how your training went, anything else, etc. And we carry on like that. You also get a discount on my live and pre-recorded strengthening and conditioning sessions called Feel Fit. With this special offer, this would only be for a base plan, so it wouldn't include race-specific training builds or sessions, but we can absolutely talk about those in your coaching sessions. There's only 10 places available for that special offer, and they're going priority access to people on the Menopause Week list. So look out for the email from me for details of how you can book in a call to find out more about that. There's just a few case studies or testimonials, whatever you call them, from clients there saying how I'd help them with their training. I'd say what I love, my passion is working particularly with women, but working with people to help them achieve their goal. If they feel there's something they want to do, but they think they can't do it for whatever reason, working with them to help them see that they can do it through the training, yes, but probably I'd say that's a small part. It's more the coaching, working with them to help them, overcome whatever the blocks are that's stopping them thinking they can do it. You can also find out more on my social media. So I'm at Feel Fit with Lucy on Facebook and Instagram, and I try and post stuff on there when I get around to it, but I try and post stuff that is helpful about your training tips and things. I also send out a weekly-ish email. If you're getting these emails from me, you'll be getting those, which again, I hope gives some support and inspiration to your training. So has anybody got any questions or feedback? You can type them into the chat or just unmute. Yeah, go for it, Alessia.
I was just wondering, Lucy, because I know we've talked about fueling for training and recovery. I just wondered about your thoughts on intermittent fasting, because I know there's lots of noise out there. There's kind of Mindy Peltz who talks about it. There's talking about for women specifically, because there's not huge amounts of research to do different points in your cycle, different numbers of hours, intermittent fasting. But also it can increase cortisol, and we've just talked about the impact, but I don't know if you have any more kind of insight or thoughts.
Funnily enough, this question comes up every time, so I've prepared a slide on it. So let me just get that slide up. And I've called it fasting in general. I will come to the intermittent fasting specifically, remind me if I don't, but I will get people saying to me, I want to lose weight. I've heard all this stuff about fasting. Should I fast? First of all, what's the goal? So, and I'm asking this generally, but feel free to answer as well, Alessia. So what is the goal? People think they should fast. And so but why? Is it because they're doing it for health reasons? There's good research around, or I can never say the word, anyway, a word that said something about like that, which is about your body clearing up the debris in its cells, particularly if you've got a cancer risk, you've either got cancer or you've got a family history of cancer and you're worried about it, then it can be really useful for that. But you need to make sure you're doing it well with all the caveats that I'm about to come to. If you are an obese man, which I know you're not if you're on this call, if you're an obese man with diabetes, it's well proven to help in those contexts. But again, we come back to this issue that so much research has been done on men and then it gets extrapolated to women. We have different hormones, we have different bodies. So we can't take the research and go, it works on an obese man and therefore it's going to help me, a perimenopausal woman, to lose weight. It might do, but that's not proven. And I'd say more than it's disproven in many, many cases. So I would avoid it if you have a history of eating disorders or disordered eating, because it's just going to, potentially fuel going back down that path. I'd avoid it if your body is already stressed. So most people, and you mentioned Mindy Pelz. Mindy Pelz is the kind of queen of fasting for women, specifically fasting for women. I've always listened to her with a big because I'm so worried about fasting for women. And she recently had Stacey Sims on her own podcast. Mindy Pelz had Stacey Sims on her own podcast, and it sounded like she didn't really know much about fasting for active women. And whenever I've heard her talking, she doesn't really differentiate. But she seemed to be completely agreeing with Stacey that in the context of an active woman, it is going to do you more harm than good for what I've already talked about, because your body is going, well, I'm about to go into the gym and do this hard workout and I haven't got enough calories on board right now. How am I going to do that? And it gets more stressed. And as you say, the higher cortisol. Menopause is already a stressful time. Why would we put more stress in there? And as I say, Mindy knows more about fasting than I do by a mile. I'm by no means an expert, but she was agreeing with Stacey. It was her podcast. She invited Stacey on and was agreeing with Stacey that in the context of an active woman doing training, it is not a menopausal active woman. It is not going to be helpful. I posted something just today, about a few hours ago. So if you look at my social media, there's details of that podcast on there, as well as another really helpful podcast about fasting, when it's helpful, when it's not. So you should, if you're exercising, avoid fasting. If your body's already highly stressed because of menopause or for something else, avoid fasting. You're just adding more stress to it. What I think there is kind of, if you want to try it, it depends when we talk about intermittent fasting, what that means. I think pretty much most people I've heard talking about fasting would agree that if we're fasting, it's helpful to do it well, no, not if you're doing a 36-hour fast, because you couldn't, but if you're doing like a 12-hour fast, to do it in sync with your circadian rhythm, because when you wake up in the morning, you have the highest level of cortisol, which is there to help you wake up. That's brilliant. But if it stays high, then that's not good. So we have this highest level of cortisol. If we then get up and we don't then have, break fast to help go, it's all right, energy's coming in, we stay in that elevated cortisol state, particularly if we go, oh, I'm feeling a bit tired, but I'll have some coffee. Now we're adding stress to stress. So rather than having a lot of sort of typical intermittent fasting from midday to 8 or whatever, why not have a fast, but it's 7 to 7 or 6 to 6? Still, depending if you train in the morning, make sure you're fueling your training. So the fast stops at the point that you start training, because you need to fuel your training. But then stop eating early. There's so much more research coming out now about if we eat too close to bedtime, it messes with our sleep, as I was saying. So arguably, we tend to eat our biggest meal of the day for our evening meal. We don't then burn any of that energy, so it just gets saved as body fat. So yes, we could eat less, but let's start our day with food. Let's have food in the day, and then let's stop eating earlier. And if that's intermittent fasting, or if that's just not eating in the evening, that's semantics, but that can be a healthy way of doing things. Does that answer the question enough, Alicia?
It does. It's really helpful. Thanks, Lucy.
But I'd really recommend those two podcasts. So the one with Stacey Sims on, I think it's 48 minutes in that they actually start talking about the foods, the fasting and active women side of things. But yeah, look at my social media for those two, and those are both really helpful. And they're both from people who are pro fasting, but who are agreeing with what I'm saying, that in this context, it is not helpful. Alice. So Alice, I've prepared a slide for you for the next one, because that's the next most common question. So Alice says, I'm a vegan, and for the correct protein intake via Whole Foods, it feels like I have to eat huge quantities. Doesn't this increase the volume of the wrong stuff too? For example, I love nuts, but aren't too many nuts not great? And then she said something else. Alice, I was going to email you. I know you've booked that call. You've absolutely got a place on that offer if you want it. I was going to email you and let you know. So don't worry about that. I'm away from the 16th to the 24th, so nobody else will be booking a call in that time either. So don't worry. So to go back to your question, this slide is not the full slide. I have slides just on vegan and vegetarian sources of protein. This has got a whole mix here. And yes, you're absolutely right, Alice. It's so much easier to get your protein in if you are if you eat meat or if you at least eat fish. In terms of vegans, so this is just giving you some sort of samples of different things and to try and show it is possible, but that you have to really think about it. As a vegetarian, so often we're told, oh, you can eat your pulses, you can eat your chickpeas, you can eat your lentils. Well, look at the numbers here. In half a can of chickpeas, you're only getting 8 grams. In a portion of lentils, you're only getting 7.5, 8 grams. So yes, you would have to eat a shed load of those to be able to meet those protein targets. So they're really good. They're whole grains. They're the lentils, the pulses. They're absolutely those whole foods we were talking about. You want them in your diet, but you would struggle to get enough protein if you're just eating them. So in terms of, and I used to be veggie. I now do eat fish because, to be honest, I did find it not too challenging. I guess I was lazy. So I started eating fish to try and get more protein into my diet. But the things that I rely on, I only eat a little bit of fish. The things that I rely on, tofu, you're getting about 20, 25 grams of, says 30, oh yeah, because per portion. So normally a pack of tofu is 400 grams. So you get about 25 grams in half a pack. Seitan, Seitan, that's kind of, I don't know what they do to it, something they've done to tofu. Vegetarian, like veggie gluten, like the Moduck or whatever, I can't find it anymore. You used to get it from Marigold. What's the other one? I was going to say kefir, I don't mean kefir. Oh, Sally, I was saying it to you the other day, but fermented soya beans, can't think what it's called, but that all of those you're kind of 20 to yes, temper, well done, thank you. All of those are more in your kind of 20-gram portion. So a typical portion you'd get 20, half a typical serving that you buy from the shop, half of that is about 20, 25 grams. It obviously depends what serving size is, but you know what I mean. So those are all really good forms of protein for vegans, just because they're so much denser in the protein. I would also say it's not, you don't absolutely don't have to do shakes and snacks, but it is a lot easier, particularly with that trying to get the protein in 30 to 40 minutes after a training session. If you're trying to get that in with real food, it's quite limiting in terms of what you're going to be able to eat. So having a shake is really helpful there. As I said, pea protein is a good source of your leucine, which is what you want for your muscle recovery. So that's a really good one. Other ones exist, and I know, I mean, I've got vegan protein powders. I don't like them nearly as much as other ones because they are gritty. Mixing them, I find the best. Anyway, I won't go into all the detail, but yes, trying to get some protein in. Things like edamame, really, really good. They're only about 8 grams per 100 grams of protein, but you can just chuck them into anything you're making, any of your dinners or whatever. You just have them in the freezer, get them in there. I have got a slide which is just for vegan and vegetarian sources. So Alice, remind me when we do that call later in the month, and I'll share that with you then. And eggs. So Alice says she started eating eggs again. Yeah, I do as well. And what we often think, we think a portion of eggs is probably 1 or 2 eggs. We probably want to be getting 3 eggs and a slice of toast or something to get up to that 25 grams. So probably eating more eggs than what we think. Any other questions from anybody? Feel free to unmute if you can't be asked to type. If anything I've said doesn't make sense or you're not sure that you agree with it or whatever, feel free to unmute and give me a shout. I'll give you a few minutes more to ask anything else. Did I have anything else I wanted to share? I will leave it there. But yeah, lovely to speak to you all. If you have got any questions, if you're interested in working with me, there's that offer. So the 50% off for the light touch plan over the winter. Give me a shout if you are interested in that. Look out for the email that's coming from me with this recording in it. Oh, thank you, Alice. And I will look forward to seeing you at 12:30 tomorrow. If you can join me, as I say, probably the most important one on the recovery, mindset and rest. If you can't join me live, obviously look out for the recording coming through. And I look forward to speaking to you all soon. Take care, guys. See ya.
Thanks.
See ya.